All right, buckle up for a deep dive that just might rock your reality, because today we're going deep into the simulation hypothesis.
That's right. The idea that all of this, everything we experience, everything we think is real.
Could actually just be a super realistic computer program.
Yeah, kind of like the Matrix. But imagine it way more complex on a scale we can barely even grasp.
So before we get too far down this rabbit hole,
Right.
let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
What exactly is the simulation hypothesis?
Well, at its core, it's the idea that what we perceive as real, what we experience around us, might not be the base level of reality.
Okay.
It might actually be a simulation, one crafted by a civilization way more advanced than us.
So basically, it's like we're all living in a super, super advanced video game.
Yeah, you got it.
But instead of controlling a character, we are the characters.
Yeah, that's the gist of it, although the scale and complexity of this hypothetical simulation would be mind-blowingly beyond anything we can currently dream up,
Yeah, and that's kind of what makes it so fascinating and honestly a little bit terrifying.
Absolutely.
It really messes with your head, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
This whole idea that what we think of as reality might not be what it seems.
Right, it forces us to question everything.
All the things we take for granted.
Absolutely.
Now, the idea has become pretty popular in recent years.
Yeah, that's...
Especially with movies like The Matrix.
Oh, yeah, that really brought the question to the mainstream.
Right, but the idea of reality being an illusion isn't really new, is it?
Not at all, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that our senses could be deceiving us has been around for a really long time, centuries.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I mean, think back to Plato's allegory of the cave back in ancient Greece.
Right, where the prisoners only see shadows on the wall and think that's reality.
Exactly. So the idea that what we perceive might be just a limited representation of a much bigger truth.
Okay, so that's been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just a Western idea either, right?
No, not at all. Eastern philosophies, like in Hinduism and Buddhism, they've explored similar concepts too.
Right, like the concept of Maya, where the physical world is seen as kind of an illusion.
Exactly. It's all about seeing through those appearances to get to the true nature of reality.
So is it fair to say that the simulation hypothesis is kind of taking that ancient philosophical question and giving it a modern, techie twist?
I'd say that's a pretty good way to put it.
Okay, cool.
And philosopher Nick Bostrom's 2003 paper, it was really a big turning point, brought the simulation hypothesis into the spotlight.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
He's kind of a big name in the simulation argument.
Right, and I remember reading about those 3 scenarios he laid out.
Oh, yeah, those are thought-provoking.
Remind me, what are those again?
So Bostrom basically argued that if it's possible to create these kinds of simulations, then one of 3 things has got to be true.
Okay.
First, maybe civilizations never reached that level of technology to make them.
Like we blow ourselves up before we get there.
Yeah, or maybe they hit some other kind of roadblock.
Right, right.
The second scenario is, even if they can create simulations, they choose not to.
Interesting.
Maybe they've moved on to something else, some other way of existing where simulations are just, I don't know, kind of boring to them.
Maybe.
But it's the third scenario, that's the one that really gets you thinking.
The one where we are probably living in a simulation.
Bingo. Bostrom said that if simulations are possible, and if civilizations decide to create them,
Yeah,
there could be just a ton of them out there.
right.
And if that's the case, statistically speaking, it's actually more likely that we're in one of those simulations than in the original base reality.
Wow. Okay, that one's a bit hard to wrap my head around.
It is.
So let's try to make this a little more concrete,
Yeah.
bring it back down to earth.
Sure.
If we set aside the whole philosophical side for a minute,
Okay.
what about the technology behind the simulation hypothesis?
Right. So the tech argument, that's a crucial part of this whole thing. And the people who support the idea, they point to all the advancements we're seeing right now, especially in stuff like virtual reality, artificial intelligence,
Oh, yeah.
and just raw computing power.
It's true. I mean, just look how far video games have come in the last few decades.
Right.
We've gone from those blocky pixels to these super immersive worlds.
Yeah, the progress is amazing.
It really is.
And the crazy thing is the rate of advancement is increasing exponentially.
So it's only going to get crazier.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
just project that trend out like hundreds of years into the future.
Okay.
And it's not that hard to imagine, right?
Yeah.
Future civilizations creating simulations that are basically indistinguishable from reality.
So we're talking about a future where we literally can't tell the difference between what's real and what's simulated.
That's what some people believe, yeah.
Wow.
And there are three main areas where tech is developing that could make this possible.
Okay, I'm all ears. Break it down for me.
First up, we've got artificial intelligence, AI. We're already seeing AI create these incredibly lifelike characters in games, you know.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They can act realistically, make complex decisions.
Yeah.
So just imagine what future AI could be capable of.
Right. AI that could create beings that are just like us.
Exactly. Maybe even simulate whole populations, each with their own unique personality, history, everything.
That's wild.
It is. Okay, then you've got quantum computing.
Ah, yes, quantum computers. I've heard of them.
Yeah, this is still a pretty new field.
Yeah.
But it has the potential to totally revolutionize how powerful computers can be.
Yeah, I've read articles about it, but to be honest, I don't really get how it all works.
Oh, it's complicated stuff, but the key difference is that quantum computers,
Yeah.
they use these principles from quantum mechanics, which lets them do calculations in a way that regular computers just can't.
Hmm.
And that means they could potentially handle the massive, massive processing power it would take to run a super complex simulation.
So basically, quantum computers are like the ultimate gaming rig for running a universe-sized simulation.
You could say that.
Yeah.
All right, and the third piece of the puzzle, we've got virtual reality, VR.
Okay.
Even the VR systems we have today, they can trick our senses, make us feel like we're in a whole different place.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So imagine VR in the future, so advanced that it doesn't just trick our senses,
Yeah.
but it can actually influence our consciousness.
Whoa. So we wouldn't just be seeing and hearing another reality, but like feeling it and experiencing it on a way deeper level.
Exactly. It's like blurring the lines between the virtual and the real.
Mind-blowing.
Right.
So if we put those three things together, advanced AI, quantum computing, super immersive VR,
Yeah.
it paints a pretty wild picture of a future where making hyper-realistic simulations
Right.
might actually be possible.
Right.
And if we could create something like that, wouldn't that mean that someone somewhere might have already done it?
It's a question that a lot of people ask. You know,
Yeah.
if the tech exists, or even if it's just going to exist in the future, it's logical to think, right?
Right.
That someone, somewhere, at some point, could have already reached that level.
And maybe we're living in one of their creations.
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, it really makes you think.
Makes you question everything.
Okay, before we go too far down that existential road,
Okay.
I want to know, what evidence is there, like real evidence, to support this whole idea?
That's a great question. And there are some really interesting things about our universe, some really weird phenomena that have definitely made people wonder if we are, in fact, living in a simulation.
I'm intrigued. Like, what kind of weird stuff are we talking about?
Well, that's the story for part 2.
All right, I guess we'll have to wait for the next installment of our deep dive then.
Definitely worth the wait.
I'm hooked. Can't wait to hear more.
We'll be back soon to explore some of those mind-bending possibilities. Welcome back to our deep dive on the simulation hypothesis.
All right, so we've talked about the basic idea and the tech that could make it possible.
Yeah, we've laid the groundwork.
But now I want to get to the really interesting stuff.
Right, the evidence.
Yeah, are there any clues out there, like hints hidden in our reality that suggest we might actually be living in a simulation?
Well, there's some pretty bizarre things about our universe, things that really make you wonder if we're seeing, like, the glitches in the Matrix, you know?
Okay, I like where this is going. Give me an example.
Right, well, let's start with quantum mechanics.
Oh, quantum mechanics. Here we go.
It's a world with totally different rules than what we experience in everyday life. Rules so strange. It almost feels like magic, you know?
I've read articles about quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Particles can be in two places at once. Information can travel faster than the speed of light.
Exactly. And those are just a couple of examples.
Yeah.
One of the most famous weird things is wave-particle duality.
Okay, refresh my memory. What's that again?
So it's the idea that both light and matter, they can act like a wave and a particle, depending on how you observe them.
Wait, so it's like the universe changes how it behaves depending on whether we're looking or not.
It kind of seems that way, yeah.
That's so strange.
It really is.
It's like those optical illusions where the picture changes depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Except this is happening at the most fundamental level of reality.
That's mind-blowing. And this is all like real scientifically proven stuff.
Yeah, it's not just theory.
Okay.
There's an experiment, a really famous one, called the double slit experiment.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that.
It demonstrates this whole duality thing in a way that just melts your brain.
All right, try to explain it to me.
Okay, so picture this. You're shining a beam of light through two tiny slits.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, you'd expect to see two bright bands of light on the screen behind the slits.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Light travels in straight lines, two slits, two bands of light.
Right.
But that's not what happens.
Really? What happens then?
You get an interference pattern.
Oh, what?
It's like a series of bright and dark bands,
Yeah.
as if the light waves are interfering with each other.
Okay, that's weird.
It is weird.
Yeah.
But light's a wave, so maybe that's not too surprising, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
But here's where it gets really freaky.
Okay.
You get the same interference pattern even when you shoot individual particles of light, photons, through the slits, like one at a time.
Wait a minute. So a single particle of light can interfere with itself? How's that even possible?
It's like each photon is going through both slits at the same time, creating a wave with itself.
Oh, that's messing with my head.
I know, right?
Hmm.
But wait, there's more. If you try to measure which slit each photon goes through, the interference pattern disappears.
So if we try to watch it, it changes how it behaves.
It does.
Mm.
Like it knows we're looking.
That's crazy.
It is. And it makes you wonder, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is reality, really? Could these quantum phenomena be showing us, like, the underlying code of our simulated universe?
Like we're seeing the pixels of reality.
Exactly. It's a wild thought, right? And some people who believe in the simulation hypothesis, they point to other quantum weirdness as evidence, too, like potential glitches in the matrix.
Like what?
Well, for example, the idea that information can travel faster than light.
Right. Which shouldn't be possible, according to, all the physics we know.
Yeah, it's like breaking the rules of reality.
Totally. It really makes you think there's something more going on, something we don't fully understand.
Definitely makes you question things.
Okay, so quantum mechanics, that's one piece of the puzzle, right? What other clues are people looking at?
Well, there's the structure of the universe itself.
What do you mean?
Think about all the fundamental constants, like the speed of light, the gravitational constant,
Okay.
These values, they seem to be perfectly fine-tuned for life to exist.
I've heard about that, the fine-tuning argument.
Yeah, it's like saying the universe was designed just for us.
Right, like there's a purpose behind it all.
Exactly. If these constants were even a tiny bit different, stars wouldn't form, planets wouldn't exist, none of this would be here.
So it's either a massive coincidence or evidence of a creator.
Or evidence of a programmer who set up the parameters of our simulated world.
Right, it makes you think.
And there's another interesting angle to this whole thing.
Oh, what's that?
The universe, it seems to run on math.
Math.
Yeah, like everything from the movement of planets to how atoms behave.
Yeah.
It can all be described with incredible accuracy using math equations.
That's true.
Like the universe is following a set of rules, a pre-programmed code, like a giant computer program.
So we're basically trying to look for patterns in the code, like hackers trying to break into the matrix.
In a sense, yeah. Trying to find evidence of the programmer's handiwork.
I love it. But are these really clues to a simulation, or are we just seeing patterns where there aren't any? Like seeing faces in the clouds?
That's the big question, isn't it? Unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Right.
It's really hard to definitively prove or disprove the simulation hypothesis.
Yeah, it's all pretty theoretical.
We're stuck with these tantalizing clues, but no smoking gun.
So it's more of a thought experiment than a scientific theory?
I think that's a fair way to put it.
Okay.
But even as a thought experiment, it has some pretty big implications.
Oh, yeah. It definitely makes you think about some deep stuff.
Big questions about what reality is, what our place in it is.
If we are in a simulation, who made it? Why?
Right.
What does it mean for free will, consciousness, all the big stuff?
Exactly. Those are the questions that we really need to grapple with.
And that's what we're going to be tackling in part 3 of our deep dive.
The philosophical and ethical dilemmas of the simulation hypothesis.
It's going to be a wild ride. All right, welcome back to our deep dive on the simulation hypothesis.
We've been on quite a journey.
Yeah, we have.
Exploring this idea that we might be living in a simulated reality.
We've talked about the tech that could make it happen, even looked at some strange phenomena.
Yeah, those glitches in the matrix.
Make you wonder if we're seeing the seams of our digital world.
Right.
But now I kind of want to shift gears a bit and talk about the really big questions.
The philosophical stuff.
Yeah, the ethical dilemmas that this whole idea throws at us.
It's one thing to think about whether we're in a simulation, but it's a whole other thing to grapple with what that actually means for us.
Exactly. Like, what does it mean for our sense of purpose, our choices, even our understanding of what it means to be human?
Huge questions.
Yeah, if our reality is just like lines of code in some giant computer program,
Right.
does that mean our lives don't really have any meaning?
It's a question that a lot of people struggle with.
It's kind of unsettling, to be honest.
Is.
So let's start with free will.
Okay, yeah.
It's a topic that philosophers have been debating forever.
Oh, yeah.
But the simulation hypothesis just adds this whole other layer of complexity.
For sure.
Like, if our reality is running on some underlying code, does that mean all our choices are already predetermined?
It's a tough one.
Yeah, are we just puppets, dancing to the tune of some programmer?
It can definitely make you feel that way, like you don't have any real control.
Yeah, like what's the point of anything if we're not really making our own choices?
But there are other ways to think about it, too.
Really? Like what?
Well, some philosophers say that even in a simulated environment,
Yeah.
there might still be room for a certain type of free will.
I'm not sure I get that.
Okay, think of it like this. Even in a video game,
Okay.
players can still make choices, right?
Yeah, of course. You choose what to do in the game.
Exactly. You can choose which path to take, how to interact with other characters.
Right.
So even though the game has rules, you still have freedom within those rules.
So you're saying our choices might be limited by the simulation,
Right.
but we can still make decisions within those boundaries.
Yeah, and some argue that even if those choices are ultimately determined by the code,
Yeah.
it's still our consciousness that's experiencing them, making them feel real to us.
Mm. That's an interesting way to think about it.
It's complex, for sure.
It really is.
But the point is, maybe the subjective experience of making choices,
Yeah.
of facing consequences, that might be enough to preserve a meaningful idea of free will, even if we are in a simulation.
Okay, so maybe we're not totally off the hook when it comes to free will.
Maybe not.
But what about the big question of purpose?
Yeah.
Like, if our reality is a simulation, does that mean our lives are pointless?
It's a heavy question, right? Makes you wonder if it all just comes down to lines of code in some giant program.
It's like finding out that everything you've ever done, all your relationships, your experiences, were all just part of some big illusion.
It can be a bit disheartening.
Yeah, it's tough to wrap your head around.
But even if our reality is simulated, those experiences are still real to us. The emotions we feel, the connections we make.
So it's kind of like saying that the characters in a book don't have real lives just because they're in a fictional world.
Exactly. Their stories can still move us, make us think, even though we know they're not real in the same way that we are.
Right, right. Their struggles and triumphs still matter, even if it's all just made up.
Exactly. And if the simulation is complex enough, if it lets us have genuine emotional experiences, real connections,
Yeah.
who's to say those experiences aren't meaningful, just as meaningful as in a non-simulated reality?
So maybe it's not so much about whether the reality itself is real or not,
Right.
but about how we experience it and what meaning we find in it.
I think that's a really powerful way to look at it.
Yeah, it kind of takes some of the pressure off.
It does.
But there's another big question that comes up, right?
Oh, yeah.
Ethics.
If we're in a simulation created by someone more advanced, what responsibilities do they have to us?
Yeah, it's like thinking about a god,
Right, it is.
If they created our world, do they have to make sure we're okay, protect us, give us some purpose?
That's the big question.
And it's not just a theoretical question anymore, is it?
Not really.
We're getting to the point where we might be able to create these kinds of simulations.
With AI, VR, all that stuff advancing so fast.
Yeah, we could be creating digital worlds that are inhabited by beings that are conscious, self-aware.
That's right. And that brings up a whole bunch of ethical issues for us to consider.
Like, what responsibilities do we have to the beings in those simulations?
Exactly. Do we have to protect them, make sure they don't suffer?
Or can we just treat them like characters in a game?
It's a tough one, right? We're talking about playing God in a way.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It is, and it's a conversation we need to be having now.
Yeah, before the tech gets too far ahead of us.
Absolutely.
So where does all this leave us? The simulation hypothesis, it really opens up a can of worms, doesn't it?
It does. A lot of questions without easy answers.
But even if we never figure out for sure whether we're in a simulation or not,
Yeah.
it makes us think about some really important stuff.
Fundamental questions about reality, about the meaning of life.
Yeah, about our place in the universe and how we should treat other beings, whether they're real or simulated.
There's a journey of exploration,
It really is.
Even if it doesn't give us all the answers, it makes us think in new ways.
And maybe that's the real value of all this, right? The simulation hypothesis forces us to look in the mirror, makes us examine our own anxieties, our hopes, our search for meaning in a world that can feel pretty chaotic.
It reminds us that the universe is full of mysteries, even if it is a simulation.
Yeah, and that our desire to learn, to understand, that's what keeps us going.
It's the journey, not just the destination.
Well said.
Whether we're in a simulation or not, that pursuit of knowledge, the exploration of ideas.
That's what makes life interesting.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive on the simulation hypothesis.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It really has, and I hope it's given our listeners some things to think about, some new perspectives on reality and our place in it.
Keep those questions coming.
And keep exploring the universe, whether it's real or simulated.
Thanks for listening.